Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a set of source materials that, honestly, it feels less like a financial analysis and more like a survival guide for the end of Europe as we know it.
It is really intense stuff. We're working from a transcript of a conversation with a man named Flipse, hosted by Robbie Adley. And it covers everything: the price of bread, the future of the euro, digital currencies.
All the way to how to, and I'm not kidding, how to slaughter a chicken if you need to.
Exactly. It's a full spectrum analysis of what he calls his doom scenario.
And just to give you, the listener, a sense of the stakes here, I want to start with a specific warning he gives. It's a powerful image.
It really is.
I want you to imagine, for a second, you wake up, it's a Tuesday morning, totally normal. You go down to your local bakery like you always do. You grab a loaf of bread.
A staple. Something simple.
Exactly. And yesterday, that loaf cost you maybe, what, 3 or 4 euros? A bit pricey with inflation, but fine. But today, the price tag says 20 euros.
20? Okay, that's a shock.
You think it's a mistake. You must be misreading it. You come back the next morning, and it's 300 euros.
And that's hyperinflation. That is the Weimar Republic scenario he's talking about. It sounds like something out of a history book.
Or a dystopian novel. But for Flipse, this isn't fiction. He's arguing that this is a very real possibility. His core premise is that the good times in Europe, the stability we've all taken for granted for decades.
They're over. He's saying a period of decline has officially begun. And it's not just a market correction. It's a systemic decay.
So who is this guy? Who is Flipse? Is he just some random person with a wild theory?
That's the key question, isn't it? And no, he's not. He's what you'd call a system critic. But he used to be a system insider. He worked in the corporate world, in finance, in the defense sector. He's seen how the machine works from the inside.
So he knows the plumbing of the system.
He does. But he says somewhere along the way, I think he pinpoints it to around 1987, he had this realization. He became a skeptic. He now views the government as the enemy and believes the financial system is, and this is his phrase, clinically dead.
Clinically dead. That's a powerful way to put it. It implies it's only being kept alive by machines.
That is precisely his argument. Life support. And our mission today is to really unpack this doom scenario. We're going to dig into his arguments on the euro, on the coming central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
And the geopolitical side of things, the tensions in Europe.
Right. And then his very, very radical advice on how to survive it all. And that's both financially, how not to lose everything, and, well, physically, what you do when the lights go out.
And we need to be clear right from the start. This is a deep dive into a very specific worldview. It's heavy on distrust, on survivalism, and it's a world away from the kind of analysis you'll get from mainstream news.
Absolutely. We're not here to say he's right or wrong. We're here to understand the logic of the argument, because the anxieties he's tapping into, a lot of people are feeling them.
Okay, so let's get into it. The whole thing seems to start with the financial system. That's section 1 for us.
Yeah.
The broken financial system. Where does he start the clock on this?
He takes us right back to 2008, the credit crisis.
Lehman Brothers, the housing market bubble bursting, the big one.
The big one. And Flipse's central claim is that we never actually fixed any of the underlying problems from 2008.
We just papered over the cracks.
Worse. He says the solution was to create more debt to solve a debt crisis.
Which sounds a lot like trying to cure an alcoholic with a bottle of whiskey. It might feel better for a minute, but you're just making the problem worse.
That's a perfect analogy. He says it just delayed the pain. He describes the current economy as a rat race that is fundamentally unsustainable. The stability we feel right now, the fact that you can go to an ATM and get cash out, he says that is a complete facade.
A mirage.
A mirage maintained by one thing and one thing only: printing money.
Quantitative easing. We've heard that term a lot. The magic money printer.
Right. The European Central Bank, the Fed in the U.S., they've just been creating currency out of thin air to buy up debt and keep the system afloat. And his argument is simple. You cannot do that forever without consequences.
And the main consequence is inflation.
Exactly. But he's not talking about the 2 or 3% inflation that central bankers say is healthy. He's explicitly warning of hyperinflation, the Weimar scenario.
That's Germany in the 1920s, right? Where people were taking wheelbarrows full of cash to the store just to buy a newspaper.
That's the historical parallel he draws. It's where that image of the 300-euro loaf of bread comes from. He calls it a price explosion. His core critique is that the euro is what's known as fiat money.
Meaning it's based on faith.
Yeah.
On a government decree.
Precisely. It's based solely on trust. It's not backed by gold, it's not backed by silver, it's not backed by anything tangible, it's a promise. And his whole point is, what happens when people stop believing in that promise?
Then the trust evaporates.
And the currency collapses. It's that simple. He believes the people in charge, the heads of the ECB, they know this. They know they're in an endgame.
So it's a trap, a catch-22. They can't stop printing money or the whole debt-laden system implodes immediately.
Right.
But if they keep printing, they are steering us directly towards hyperinflation and the destruction of the currency.
That's the corner they've painted themselves into, according to Flipse. And this is why, he says, they're in such a rush to roll out the next system. But before we get to that, there's a crucial piece of this puzzle, and it's about the internal dynamics of Europe.
Okay.
This brings us to Section 2, the European wealth transfer. This is where he talks about Eurobonds.
I've definitely heard that term, Eurobonds. It's usually framed as a good thing, European solidarity.
That's the sales pitch. But Flip sees it as the final nail in the coffin for countries like the Netherlands and Germany.
So what are they exactly, in simple terms?
Think of it like a jank credit card for Europe. Instead of Italy borrowing money on its own reputation and Germany on its sis, the EU borrows money altogether. The risk is pooled.
So a country with a bad credit score gets to borrow at the same rate as a country with a great one.
Exactly. And Flip says this is a complete disaster for what he calls the net payer countries.
The ones who put more money into the EU budget than they get back.
Correct. And he singles out the Netherlands. He says for its size, the Netherlands is the wealthiest piggy bank in Europe. He talks about something like 1,800 billion euros sitting in Dutch pension funds. Huge private savings. He calls it a stinking rich country.
Okay, so there's a lot of money in the Dutch pot. Why is pooling the debt such a catastrophe in his view?
Because of what he calls the theft narrative. He doesn't see this as solidarity. He sees it as a planned mechanism to siphon that wealth from the Dutch pension funds and savings accounts to pay off the debts of Southern European countries.
So countries like Italy, Spain, maybe France?
Those are the ones he often mentions. And this is where his argument gets really controversial and, frankly, really interesting. He just completely flips the standard narrative on its head.
The narrative that the rich, responsible North has to bail out the poor, profligate South.
He says that's a lie. He argues that while the northern states, the governments are rich, the actual citizens in those countries are often much poorer than the Southern Europeans.
Wait, how does that work? How can a Dutch citizen be poorer than an Italian one?
It comes down to the nature of their wealth. He says, you look at a typical person in Italy or Spain, what do they have? Very often they own their home outright, no mortgage. Their family has owned it for generations. They might have significant cash reserves, maybe gold, stuff that's not even in the official banking system.
Okay.
Now look at the typical Dutch person, what do they have? A massive mortgage. They live in a house that is, for all intents and purposes, owned by the bank. Their wealth is all tied up in a pension fund that they can't access until they're 67.
So it's paper wealth versus tangible wealth.
Exactly. So he paints this picture where the average Dutch person is working like crazy, paying incredibly high taxes, living in a house they don't own, all to build up this pension pot. Meanwhile, the Italian person might be living mortgage-free in a family home.
And the Eurobond scheme, in his eyes, is designed to take the money from that Dutch pension pot to prop up the Italian state.
That is precisely his argument, which is why he uses this really provocative schoolyard metaphor.
Right.
He says, the Netherlands likes to see itself as the bravest boy in the class, the one who always does his homework and follows the rules.
The teacher's pet.
Yeah, but Flip says, no, the Netherlands isn't the brave kid, it's the nasty kid.
The nasty kid. Why nasty?
Because, he argues, the Dutch state is robbing its own citizens to pay for the rest of the class. He says the government in The Hague is willing to sacrifice the future of its own population to keep this European project on life support.
Wow. So the financial system is broken, hyperinflation is on the horizon, and our national wealth is being lined up for transfer. That's a grim picture.
It's incredibly grim. But for Flipse, it's all a prelude to the government's solution. And that solution, he says, is even worse than the problem.
And this is where we get into the Central Bank Digital Currency, the CBDC.
This is Section 3, the digital prison.
Now, when I hear about this in the news, it's always pitched as, a convenience, like Apple Pay, but more efficient.
That's the marketing. Flip sees it as something else entirely. For him, a CBDC is not a convenience, it's a digital prison.
A prison. That is a heavy term. Let's unpack that. Why a prison?
He predicts it's coming around 2027, and he thinks the timing is critical. Remember, the old system, the euro, is clinically dead in his view. So the CBDC is the replacement. But it's fundamentally different from the digital money we use now.
How is it different? I mean, my money is already just numbers on a screen.
Yeah.
I barely use cash.
But right now, those numbers are a liability of a commercial bank. You have an account with, say, Barclays or ING. When you buy something, it's a transaction between you, the merchant, and your private bank. With a CBDC, you have an account directly with the central bank, with the government. Flipse says this gives the government total insight and, more importantly, total control.
Control over what? My spending.
Everything. He says it's the end of financial privacy. But it's more than that. It's about programmable money. If the government issues the money, the government can set the rules for that money.
What kind of rules?
For example, they could program it to expire. Use these 100 euros by the end of the month, or they disappear to stimulate the economy. Or they could program it to only be spent on certain things. This money can be used for food, but not for gasoline.
So they could enforce behaviors.
Instantly and automatically. And this is where he connects it to the broader Agenda 2030.
The UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Right. Flipse views the climate goals, in particular, as being used to deconstruct the economy. He says this transition is being forced through under high pressure, and they don't care if companies go bankrupt or leave Europe.
And the CBDC would be the perfect tool to enforce that transition on an individual level.
The perfect tool. Imagine a personal carbon footprint tracker linked directly to your digital wallet. You've hit your travel limit for the month. Your money literally won't work at the train station or the airport.
That's chilling.
For him, it represents a total loss of freedom. He uses this Dutch alliteration, the 3 V's, to describe what citizens are losing.
The 3 V's.
Vrijheid, which is freedom, veiligheid, which is safety, and vermogen, which is wealth.
Freedom, safety, and wealth. He argues we're losing all 3 at once.
All at the same time. And he points out this strange psychological paradox. He says, materially, people might feel richer than ever. You have a bigger TV, a nicer car, but they're also more anxious than ever.
Because they have more to lose.
And because they feel, deep down, that they're losing control to what he calls a predatory state.
Which brings us to a real cornerstone of his entire worldview. Section 4. The enemy state.
He does not mince words on this. He says it explicitly. Quote, "The government is your enemy."
That is such a stark statement. Most of us are raised to believe the government might be inefficient, maybe bureaucratic, but it's fundamentally there to help.
Or at least not to harm. But Flipse sees it as actively hostile. And he says this isn't just a theory for him. This comes from his own experience working in finance and defense going back to the late 80s. He says he learned firsthand that the government operates through cover-ups and fraud.
He talks about this idea of mutual distrust.
Yes. He says it's a two-way street now. The government fundamentally distrusts its citizens. He brings up the Toesleken affair here in the Netherlands.
The child benefit scandal, that was huge.
It was devastating. Thousands of ordinary families were falsely accused of fraud by the tax authorities, branded as criminals, and financially destroyed. Lives were ruined.
And the system just ground them down.
It did. And Flipse uses that as Exhibit A. He says, look, the state will hunt you, the citizen, to the ends of the earth over a tiny mistake. But when the state makes a colossal, life-destroying error, no one is really held accountable. So, of course, the citizen no longer trusts the government. The social contract is broken.
And from there, he attacks the very idea that we live in a democracy.
He calls it a democratic illusion. He claims the Netherlands, and by extension most of Europe, isn't a democracy, it's an oligarchy. It's run by a small, unelected elite.
And his proof for that.
He points to things like referendums being ignored or just abolished altogether. Or, for instance, he claims the Dutch parliament has actually voted no to a CBDC.
They did.
That's his claim. But it doesn't matter because the project continues to be pushed forward at the European Central Bank level by people nobody voted for.
So your vote becomes meaningless.
It creates this feeling of powerlessness, and it feeds into his theory that elections don't really matter. He argues there's almost no real right-wing party in the Netherlands anymore. He even classifies the VVD, Mark Rutte's party, which is traditionally seen as center-right.
He calls them left.
He says they're all part of the same uniparty that serves the interests of the elite. He also touches on the very sensitive topic of how right-wing is so often conflated with racist.
That's a common accusation.
It is, but he argues that, in his experience, real racism is actually more prevalent on the left in the form of an elitist snobbery and exclusion, whereas the right, he says, is more practical. They don't care about your background, only if you're willing to work.
To describe the politicians leading this system, he uses a really, really disturbing analogy: the nice uncle.
Yeah, this one is. It's a tough one to hear, but it's very memorable.
It's visceral.
It is.
Okay.
He's warning you not to be fooled by a pleasant exterior. He compares politicians like Mark Rutte or Ursula von der Leyen, people who are well-spoken, polite, always smiling to the nice uncle in a family.
The one everyone loves.
The one who's charming at family dinners, always brings a gift. But behind closed doors, he turns out to be a monster. A child abuser.
Oof, that's dark.
It's meant to be dark. His point is that tyranny doesn't always come with a scary face and a uniform. It often comes with a smile and a suit. He's telling you. Judge them by their actions and the results, not by how polite they seem on TV.
Okay, so we have a collapsing financial system, a predatory government building a digital prison, and it's all run by people we shouldn't trust. You'd think that's enough. But then he brings in the threat of war.
Right. Section 5, geopolitics, war, and media manipulation. For Flipse, this is a huge part of the coming storm. And again, his view is completely at odds with what we typically hear.
He has a very different take on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Very different. He's incredibly critical of the mainstream media narrative. He says we've been fed a constant stream of what he calls lies.
Oh, shares.
That Russia is weak and losing, that Putin is on his deathbed with cancer, that the sanctions are crippling the Russian economy. He says this is all nonsense.
And what's his version of reality?
He argues that sanctions almost never work, historically, and they're failing now. In fact, he says the West is hurting itself far more than it's hurting Russia, with high energy prices and inflation. He claims Russia is not losing the war, and the whole media story is just propaganda to maintain public support.
And this leads to a very specific and, frankly, scary warning he has about emergency laws.
This is a point that probably makes anyone listening sit up and pay attention. He says there are 25 specific emergency laws in the Netherlands that are already written and just waiting to be activated.
What can these laws do?
They allow the government to switch to a war economy almost overnight. He gives examples like the state being able to just seize private trucks for military transport.
So if you earn a trucking company, you can wake up one day and your entire fleet is gone.
It's been requisitioned. Or they could force your factory to stop making whatever it makes and start producing goods for the military.
But what about people?
That's the biggest one. Reinstating the draft, or what he calls labor duty. And he's very specific about the demographic they'll target.
Who is it?
Men and women, age 17 to 45.
17 to 45. That's not just teenagers. That's the bulk of the workforce. That's parents, business owners, professionals.
It's a massive portion of the population. And his warning is that these laws don't need a long, drawn-out debate in Parliament. If the government declares an emergency, it's just a signature on a piece of paper. They can flip the switch.
And he blames the media for keeping the public completely in the dark about this possibility.
Completely. He doesn't see the media as a watchdog anymore. He calls them the standard bearer of the elite. His term for journalists is, well, it's mentally castrated.
Wow. He really does not hold back.
No. He clarifies that he doesn't think they're all evil or corrupt. He thinks they're just hypnotized by the system. They go to the same schools, they travel in the same social circles as the politicians, and they just repeat the official press releases. So in his view, the public is being allowed to sleepwalk towards a major conflict.
All right, so that's the threat matrix. It's comprehensive. Financial collapse, government hostility, war, media failure. I think for most people, hearing all this would just lead to despair.
It could. But Flipse is all about action. He is a prepper, a survivalist, which brings us to Section 6, prepping and his network grip.
But first, he has some pretty harsh words for modern Westerners' ability to survive anything.
Oh, he does. He calls it the prince and princess syndrome.
I feel like I might be a prime candidate for that.
Mm-hmm.
My day's ruined if the internet goes down for an hour.
Well, his argument is that we in Western Europe, especially in a country like the Netherlands, are completely spoiled. We are so used to complex systems working perfectly. The lights turn on, clean water comes out of the tap, the supermarket shelves are always full.
We've lost any sense of self-reliance.
Totally. He contrasts it with someone from, say, Albania. He says if the power goes out in Albania, people just cope. They have a wood stove, they have a garden, they know how to manage. If the power goes out in Amsterdam for 3 days, it's total chaos.
And this is what leads him to create his solution, this network he calls GRIP.
Exactly. GRIP is for entrepreneurs and people he calls awake. the ones who see the storm on the horizon. And it's not a book club. They do practical, hands-on resilience training.
This is where the famous chicken anecdote comes in.
The chicken anecdote, it's such a perfect illustration of his philosophy. He describes a training exercise where each participant is given a live chicken.
A live clucking chicken?
A live chicken. And their task is to turn it into dinner. They have to slaughter it, pluck it, clean it, and cook it.
I can imagine for a lot of modern urban people, that would be a deeply confronting, maybe even traumatic experience.
Of course, but that's the whole point. He's trying to break that princess conditioning. It's a metaphor for self-reliance. When the supply chain breaks and the supermarket is empty, can you actually feed yourself? They also teach things like how to filter water from a ditch, basic self-defense, how to secure off-grid energy.
But it's not just about wilderness survival skills. He has a very specific plan B for that war threat we talked about.
Yes. This is his advice to parents who have children in that 17 to 45 age bracket. He says, you need to have a bug-out plan.
A bug-out plan, as in get out of the country.
Immediately. He says the moment you hear that conscription is being activated, you leave. You don't wait. And he's very clear about where to go, or rather, where not to go. He says, avoid NATO countries.
Because if you flee from the Netherlands to Germany, they're part of the same alliance. They'll just send you back.
Precisely. They'd likely have agreements in place. So he suggests places like Switzerland or Austria, which have a history of neutrality. Or, even better, get further away. South America, for example.
That is some extreme advice. Pack up your family and move to another continent on a moment's notice.
It is extreme advice, but it's for what he sees as an extreme and imminent scenario. From his perspective, it's the only logical response to protect your children from being sent to a war.
Okay, so that's physical survival. What about financial survival? If the euro's going to collapse, what does he tell people to do with their savings? That's our final section, the financial survival guide.
His number one piece of advice is very simple. Get out. The euro. The euro.
Completely. Sell it all.
Pretty much. He says you should only keep the bare minimum you need for your monthly bills in a euro-based bank account. If your expenses are 1,000 euros a month, maybe keep 1,000 or 2,000 in there. The rest of your savings.
Get into something. Huh?
Get it out. And he has a few preferred assets. The first one is the classic, gold.
The ultimate inflation hedge.
It is, and he makes a very compelling point. He says, look at what the central banks themselves are doing. Not what they're saying, but what they're doing. Since 2011, central banks around the world have been buying physical gold in record amounts.
So he's saying if the people in charge of the currency are secretly hedging against it with gold, shouldn't you?
That's exactly it. And he stresses physical ownership. Don't buy a paper certificate or a stock in a gold mining company. Buy bars or coins that you can physically hold, because if the system truly breaks, that's the only thing that's guaranteed to be yours.
Okay, so gold is bucket number one. What's next?
Bitcoin.
That's interesting. You often find that the gold bugs and the crypto fans are in two separate, often warring camps.
They are. But Flipse sees a role for both. But he frames Bitcoin very differently than your typical crypto speculator. He says, do not buy Bitcoin to get rich quick. Don't look at it as an investment that's going to the moon.
So what is it for then?
It's a parallel payment system, a financial lifeboat. His scenario is, what if the banking system freezes? Or what if the government decides you're a political dissident and just shuts off your CBDC account?
Bitcoin is a way to transact outside of their control.
Exactly. It's about freedom and utility, not about getting rich. He also recommends holding foreign currencies.
Like which ones?
The Swiss franc, the Norwegian krone, currencies from stable countries outside of the immediate Eurozone disaster area. He even speculates about a future BRICS-backed currency.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Right. He sees the center of economic power shifting east, so having some exposure to that bloc could be a smart long-term hedge.
And he also says don't just hold these assets here. He advises banking abroad.
Yes, this is crucial. Open a bank account in a non-EU country, like Switzerland. The idea is to protect yourself from a bail-in, where a failing government just seizes depositor funds, or from capital controls that prevent you from moving your money out.
And finally, he has a more optimistic take. He talks about the entrepreneurial mindset.
This is the silver lining in his doom cloud. He says, don't just hoard your assets and hide, look for opportunities. And he uses that famous old banking adage, buy when there's blood in the streets.
Even if it's your own blood, as the saying goes.
Right. The point is, a systemic crash, as terrifying as it is also a massive transfer of wealth. Assets companies, real estate, technology will be available for pennies on the dollar.
So if you're one of the few who preserved their capital in gold or Swiss francs,
You're in a position to buy those assets and build real, lasting wealth for the recovery that will eventually come. It's about moving from being a victim of the collapse to being a beneficiary of the reset.
man, it is a lot to process. We have gone from the price of a loaf of bread to slaughtering chickens to international finance and fleeing the country.
It's a dizzying and frankly terrifying worldview. It's a perfect storm of financial collapse, digital control, war, and the loss of personal freedom.
And I think the final, most provocative thought he leaves us with really circles back to that prince and princess idea he started with.
It does. He says something like 80 or 90% of the population is, in his words, asleep or mentally castrated. He believes that when the system breaks, these people will be completely helpless. They'll just stand there waiting for the government to save them.
But the government won't be coming.
Or the help they offer will be the digital prison. He believes the only hope lies with the outliers, the 10%, the unruly entrepreneurs, the nasty kids who question authority and are willing to get their hands dirty.
So I guess the question we have to leave you, the listener, with is this. If the power went out tonight and your bank card stopped working, who would you be? Would you be the helpless prince or princess waiting for someone to come and fix it?
Or would you be the one who knows how to find clean water, how to build a fire, and yes, maybe even how to slaughter the chicken?
It's a heavy question to ponder, even if you think he's completely wrong about the timeline or the outcome.
Because as Flipse would probably say, it's far better to have the skills and not need them than to one day desperately need them and not have them.
On that note, a very heavy note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Flipse. It has certainly given us a lot to think about.
Absolutely. Until next time.
Stay curious, and maybe buy an extra bag of rice and a water filter, just in case. We'll see you next time.